Hello students, I welcome you all for today's class. I hope everybody are doing good. So before we move on to today's class, we'll have a recap of what we learned in the previous class, okay? So first we looked into the adaptation in frog and camel, and next we moved on to the difference between the unicellular and multicellular organisms, and at last we saw the adaptive features of animals from different habitats, right? In adaptive features of animals from different habitats, we saw about polar bear, penguin, mountain goat, and about lion. Do you all remember? In today's class, we'll be discussing about Unit 6, that is Health and Hygiene. Okay, so in Health and Hygiene, you'll be learning about what is health, what is hygiene, and the components of food. In components of food, you will be learning about the carbohydrates, fats, and proteins in today's class. Okay, so in today's class, you'll be learning about what is health, hygiene, and the components of food. In components of food, you will be learning about carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Okay, so first we look into what is health. So, the word health refers to a state of complete emotional and physical well-being. Okay, so the term health refers to a state of complete emotional and physical well-being. And healthcare exists to help people maintain this optimal state of health. Okay, so what is the term health means? It refers to the state of complete emotional and physical well-being. Okay, now we'll move to the definition of health. So as defined by the World Health Organization, which is shortly written as WHO, it is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Okay, so according to WHO, health is defined as the state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. Okay, and it is not the absence of disease or infirmity. Got it, students? So, health is a dynamic condition resulting from a body's constant adjustment and adaptation in response to stresses and changes in the environment for maintaining an inner equilibrium called hemostasis. Okay, so what does equilibrium mean? Equilibrium means the condition in which all the acting influences are balanced or cancelled by equal opposing forces, resulting in a stable system. Okay, so what does equilibrium mean? It is the state of balance or static. Okay, and hemostasis means it is a process to prevent and stop bleeding, meaning to keep blood within a damaged blood vessel. Okay, so it is the first stage of wound healing. So hemostasis is the process to prevent and stop bleeding. Okay, so health is a dynamic condition resulting from a body's constant adjustment and adaptations in response to the stresses and changes caused by the environment. Okay, and this we call it as hemostasis. Got it, students? So now we'll move to what is hygiene. So hygiene is the science of the establishment and maintenance of health condition or practices conducive to health as poor personal hygiene. Okay, so what is hygiene? It is a science of establishment and maintenance of health conditions or practices. Okay, and it is also defined as the practice of keeping yourself and your surroundings clean, especially in order to prevent illness or the spread of diseases. Okay, for example, Brushing your teeth regularly is an important part of good oral hygiene. Okay, so what is hygiene? It is the practice of keeping yourself and your surroundings clean in order to prevent illness or the spread of diseases. Okay, it is also defined as the science of the establishment and maintenance of health conditions or practices. So now we'll move on to the components of food. So what does the term nutrients mean? It is the chemical constituents of food which give us energy, and it helps to build our body and protects us from diseases. Okay, so such type of foods are called as nutrients. Okay, so the chemical constituents of food which gives us energy in order to build our body and protect us from diseases are called as nutrients. Okay, so the various components of food are the carbohydrate, proteins, fats, vitamins, minerals, and water. Okay, so what are the various components of food? Yes, it is the carbohydrates, proteins, fats, vitamins, minerals, and water. Okay. Now we'll be learning about the components of food one by one. In today's class, you'll be learning about carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Okay. So first we'll be learning about carbohydrates. So what are carbohydrates? They are the energy giving components of the food. Okay. So we can obtain carbohydrates in the form of sugar, starch, and dietary fibers. Okay. So the dietary fibers are found in edible plant foods such as the cereals, fruits, vegetables, dried peas, nuts, lentils, and grains. Okay. So carbohydrates are obtained in the form of sugar, starch, and dietary fibers. Now we'll be looking into the sources of carbohydrates. So the first form of carbohydrate is sugar, and the sources are the fruits, honey, cane sugar, and sugar beet. Okay, and the second form of carbohydrates is the starch, and the sources are rice, wheat, maize, and potato. Whereas the third form of carbohydrates are the dietary fiber, and it is highly seen in whole grains and nuts. Okay, so these are the forms of carbohydrates and the sources of forms of carbohydrates. Okay, so the sugar is seen in fruits, honey, cane sugar, and sugar beet, whereas starch is seen in rice, wheat, maize, and potato. And the last one, dietary fiber, is seen in whole grains and nuts. Okay, so now we'll see the pictures of the sources. Okay, so the first picture is the fruits. Okay, so fruits are the sources of sugar, right? And then the honey and sugar cane or cane sugar and the beetroot. So the first 5 pictures are the sources of sugar. Okay, whereas rice, maize, and potatoes are the sources for starch, and whole grains and nuts are the sources for dietary fibers. Okay, so these are the sources of carbohydrates. Okay, so what are the various forms of carbohydrates? It is the sugar, starch, and dietary fiber. Okay, we can obtain carbohydrates in the form of sugar, starch, and dietary fiber. Got it, students? So next we'll move on to fats. So fats is also an energy giving food. Okay, it provides more energy than carbohydrates. So some of the important sources of fats are the butter, ghee, milk, cheese, paneer, nuts, meat, fish, egg yolk, etc. Okay. Apart from giving energy, fats also insulate our body and protects the cells. Okay, so this is all about fats. So what are fats? It is also an energy giving food and it provides more energy when compared to carbohydrates. Okay, and we saw the few sources of fats are the butter, ghee, milk, cheese, paneer, nuts, meat, fish, and the egg yolk. Okay, so apart from giving energy, they also insulate our body and protects the various cells found in our body. Okay, so now we'll see the pictures of the various sources of fats, which are the butter, ghee, milk, cheese, paneer, nuts, meat, fish, egg yolk, etc. Okay, so these are all the sources of fats. Okay, so what are the sources of fats? They are the butter, ghee, milk, cheese, nuts, paneer, meat, fish, egg yolk, etc. Okay, now we'll move on to the last component of food in today's class, that is proteins. Okay, so proteins are necessary for a growth as well as for regulating various functions such as digestion. Okay, so proteins are the body building foods. Okay, so what are proteins? Proteins are necessary for our growth as well as for regulating various functions in our body. Okay, so the various sources of proteins are pulses, eggs, fish, milk, chicken, soya bean, nut, grams, etc. Okay, so these are the various sources of proteins. Okay, so what are proteins? They are generally the bodybuilding foods. They are necessary for a growth and repair. Okay, they regulate the various functions in our body such as digestion. Okay, now we'll see the pictures of various sources of proteins. So this is the picture of pulses, eggs, fish, milk, chicken, soya bean, nut, grams, etc. Okay, so these are the pictures of pulses, eggs, fish, milk, chicken, soya bean, nut, grams, etc. Okay, so these are all the sources of proteins. So what are proteins? Proteins are the bodybuilding foods which are necessary for a growth as well as for regulating the various body functions. Okay, so that's it for today's class, students. Now I'll do a recap of what we learned in today's class. Okay, so first we looked into what is health. So the term health refers to a state of complete emotional and physical well-being. Okay, and the healthcare exists to help people maintain this optimal state of health. And next we moved on to the definition of health. According to the World Health Organization, health is defined as the state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. Okay, and it is not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Health is a dynamic condition resulting from a body's constant adjustment and adaptation in response to stresses and changes in the environment for maintaining an inner equilibrium. Okay, and this we call it as hemostasis. And next we moved on to hygiene. So what is hygiene? It is a science of the establishment and maintenance of health condition or practices conducive to health as poor personal hygiene. Okay, the term hygiene is also defined as the practice of keeping yourself and your surroundings clean, especially in order to prevent illness or the spread of diseases. Okay, and next we moved on to the components of food. First we looked into the definition of what are nutrients. So the chemical constituents of food which provides us energy and helps us to build a body and protects us from diseases are called as nutrients. Okay, so and next we moved on to the various components of food, which are the carbohydrates, proteins, fats, vitamins, minerals, and water. In today's class, we looked into what are carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, right? So first, we'll look into what are carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are the energy-giving components of food, and we obtain carbohydrates in the form of sugar, starch, and dietary fibers. And then we saw the tabulation of the various forms of carbohydrates and their sources. So the first form of carbohydrates is the sugar, and the various sources are the fruits, honey, cane sugar, and sugar beet. And the second form of carbohydrates is the starch, and the various sources are rice, wheat, maize, and potato. And the last form of carbohydrates are the dietary fiber, and the sources are whole grain, nuts, etc. Okay, and then we saw the various pictures of the sources of carbohydrates. Okay, students. And next we moved on to what are fats. So fats are also the energy giving food, and it provides more energy when compared to carbohydrates. Okay, and we saw the various sources of fats were the butter, ghee, milk, cheese, paneer, nuts, meat, fish, egg yolk, etc. So apart from giving energy, fats also insulate our body and it protects the various cells found in our body. Okay, and then we saw the various pictures of the sources of fats. And the last one we saw in today's class are the proteins. So proteins are known for bodybuilding foods. Okay, so proteins are generally bodybuilding foods, and they are necessary for our growth as well as for regulating various body functions such as the digestion. Okay, the various sources of proteins are the pulses, eggs, fish, milk, chicken, soya bean, nut, grains, etc. Okay, and then we saw the various pictures of the sources of proteins, which are the pulses, eggs, milk, fish, chicken, soya bean, nuts, etc. Okay, so that's it for today's class, students. I have attached the assignments for you. Kindly write it in your notebook. Thank you, students.